The Fujifilm X-S20 doesn't get enough credit for how powerful this camera is. Everyone keeps talking about how you need like a full frame cinema camera to get cinematic shots, but this tiny little body can shoot up to 6.2K open gate. It has 10-bit 422 plus, 4K 60, and f-log2 for the cinematic color grading that you guys need. So it is a very powerful camera for only $1,300. And in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to get cinematic looking footages on your Fujifilm X-S20. You don't need like a $5,000 full frame setup. You just need to know what to do. Let's go. So let's talk about camera settings for your Fujifilm X-S20. What you want to do is actually shoot in f-log2. This is going to give you the flattest picture profile, so that way it holds the details in the shadows and the highlights, and it has all this dynamic range that you guys can work with if you guys are serious about color grading your footages. However, if you guys, don't really care about color grading or f-log2 or anything like that, you can always use the film simulations that is baked into this camera. Some of my favorite ones that I use is the Eterna film simulation. That's really great for the look of your video. And I heard Reggie B Photos, shout out to him, he doesn't even shoot in f-log2. That guy just used classic chrome, and then he doesn't color grade anything. He just set it on for his YouTube channel and it looks great. I normally shoot in 6.2K open gate. You don't have to if you don't want to, but that's for me to go in and just crop. But for the general use out there, if you guys don't need 6.2K open gate, don't worry about it, because it's really like a trendy buzzword nowadays. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. A fair warning that it is CPU intensive. You're gonna need like a fast computer to be able to edit on the 6.2K open gate files. When you guys decide to film in f-log2 and the highest bit rate, this is something you guys have to take into consideration, is if your machine is able to process this. Okay, so we gotta talk about frame rate. The cinematic frame rate is 24 frames per second. It's not 30 FPS, nor is it 60 FPS. Most people have preferences between 24p and 30p. I know that MKBHD, he swears by 30 frames per second. However, that's not the true cinematic frame rate. If you want your footage to look cinematic, it's 24 frames per second. Use 30 frames per second is if you want your footage to look just a little bit crispier than what 24p has to offer. And when it comes to 60 frames per second, although I don't talk about it as it's not a cinematic frame rate, there are people that film in 60 frames per second. I personally use it to slow down my footage. It's going to be B-roll. I'm going to change it to 4K 60 just for the slow motion. If you want to know what 60 frames per second looks like, just think of a sports broadcast game, like your hockey game, your NFL game, your NBA games. They all film in 60 frames per second just to get that hyper realistic shots. Let's talk about your lens choices here. In order to get cinematic looking footage, there are some things that you gotta look at. You gotta look at the shallow depth of field. That comes into play when you're talking about a cinematic looking footage. You got to choose a lens that has a fast and wide aperture, f1.4, f2, f1.8, f1.7, and so on. And the other thing that you got to know about is compression. When we talk about compression, we talk about bringing everything from the background to the front, and it gives you this compressed look that you see in Hollywood films. And this is what goes into play to give yourself a polished look. How do you get this compression look? You gotta use zoom lenses or a very mid to telephoto prime lens. When you use something like a kit lens or like a standard zoom lens, you wanna zoom in all the way to the long end of the focal length. And from here, this is how you're going to get that compression look. What I recommend is a standard f2.8 lens, so you can get that background blur. Anything higher in aperture, like an f4 lens or anything like that, the blur becomes less apparent. So what I recommend is using a lens, Fujifilm X-S20 to 55mm f2.8. If you're on a budget, you can also check out the Tamron 17 to 70mm f2.8 as well. That's one of my favorite standard zoom lens for the Fujifilm X mount. I think it does an incredible job at photos and videos, and you can't go wrong with that. And it's a little bit cheaper than Fuji's standard zoom lens. If you want to make videos for your travel and you don't want to lug around like big lenses, the Sigma 18 to 50mm f2.8 is a solid choice. It gives you the standard f2.8, and it's still long enough at 50mm to give you that compression. Combined with the f2.8, you're going to get some good subject separation as well. I love that lens as well for my travel photography. These are all great options for your video needs, and it will make your Fujifilm X-S20 footage look super cinematic. If you can't afford like prime lenses like f1.4 lenses, you can also try the f1.8 lenses or the f2 lenses from Fujifilm, the Fujicrons. Those will work as well. We got to talk about the f1.7 Air series lenses from Viltrox. Those won't break the bank for you guys, and at f1.7 it's still fast enough to let in a good amount of light for low light situations, and as well give you that subject, give you that background blur and that bokeh and that subject isolation that you would want in your footage. So again, if you guys can't afford the Fuji native prime lenses, I think this is a good alternative to make your footage look cinematic. So if you want cinematic footage, then you need to shoot with the right base settings, okay? It doesn't matter what lens you use. If your shutter speed is off, your footage is going to look weird. So here's what I recommend. So when we set our shutter speed to get the cinematic motion blur in this video, can you see that? That's the motion blur you're looking for. That's how you make your footage look natural. It looks cinematic. It doesn't look choppy. Now, when we do this, we always have to follow the golden rule. It's always 1 over twice your frame rate. When we are shooting in 24 frames per second, we must use 1 over 50th of a shutter speed, and this is how you get that smooth motion blur going on. And if you crank that shutter speed up too fast, everything looks very jittery and very video gamey. In order to get that cinematic looking footage, you want to shoot as wide as you can, f1.4, f2, f1.8, and so on. And for the ISO, you want to keep it as low as possible. However, once you shoot an f-log2, the starting base ISO is at ISO 1250. Now, that's kind of high. Combine the ISO 1250 with the f1.4 aperture and the 1 over 50th of a second, then you're going to get a video that is quite blown out. And this is why it's important. If you want to keep your cinematic settings, you want to keep the cinematic motion blur, you want to keep everything at 1 over 50th of a second, this is where an ND filter comes into play. Just think of an ND filter as sunglasses for your lens. It cuts down the light hitting your sensor, which means you can stick to those cinematic settings. What are your options now? So you can either close it down, and I'm at f16 right now, and as you can see, when you do this, you're not going to get any subject isolation. You're not going to get any background blur. And the other thing you can do is to crank your shutter speed so that you get the proper exposure. And right now, holy crap. I mean, I'm at 1 over 4,000 of a second. So when you do this, you can see when I wave my hand, it's a little bit choppy. You can see how jittery that looks, and it does not look good for a cinematic looking footage. So put this back to 1 over 50th of a second. And this is where the ND filter comes in handy, because it just cuts through the light, and I can adjust it. And now I can just stick to my cinematic settings, which is at f1.4 and 1 over 50th of a second. And as you can see now, when I wave my hands, it's a little bit blurry. That's the motion blur that you want. And that's how you make your footage look cinematic and look very natural to what you see on television and on Hollywood films. D&D filter is non-negotiable. You must have one to make your footage look cinematic. I want to add another thing is if you are going to shoot this handheld, make sure to turn on your stabilization on your Fujifilm X-S20. The great thing about the X-S20 is it has IBIS, whereas something like the Fujifilm XM5, they don't have image stabilization. What they do have is digital stabilization. To me, it doesn't look as good as if we just have actual image stabilization inside the sensor. That brings me to the next point. We got all our settings down. We got the aperture down, we got the shutter speed down, we got our ISO down, we got the ND filters to keep it at that cinematic motion blur. But that's not enough. In order to make your video look cinematic, think about composition, okay? You gotta use something like the rule of thirds, and I think I'm in the rule of thirds right now, I'm not too sure. So don't center everything. Don't put your subject in the center, because that can sometimes look a little bit tacky. So, just put your subject off to one side, on the third, and let the empty space breathe, and it creates tension, mood, and a sense of space. Another thing you can do is add foreground elements. You've got to frame your subject with something in front, like plants, doors, railings. It adds depth, okay? And it makes the viewer feel like they're in the scene and not just watching it. Another thing you can do to make your footage look cinematic is to use things that we already know in photography, like leading lines as well. So like streets, hallways, fences, they all pull your eyes in towards the subject. So use that to guide the viewers, to guide the attention where you want it. You also have to think in layers as well. A strong cinematic shot has foreground element, middle ground, and background. So just don't shoot flat. You got to think 3D scope. You got to create separation and dimension. So that's one thing that I have to get good at. One of the best TV shows to have like the best cinematography ever is Better Call Saul. And every time I watch it, I just get so mesmerized by the framing, the composition, the leading lines. They do a lot of things in that show, which I fucking love. So go watch Better Call Saul if you need more inspiration on cinematography. You got to tell a story with a sequence. Like when you're out shooting, just don't grab one random cinematic clip and move on. You got to think about building a sequence. You start with an establishing shot. You got to start wide and show the viewer where they are. So, and once you get the wide shot, you start getting closer and you get like a medium shot. Focus on something specific, like people walking, like what I did right here. And then you go in and you get like a detail shot, a close-up shot. At the end, you can also get the exit shot or something a little bit moving. So this is where you can go back to the establishing shot and just pan out, zoom in and just pan out a little bit. And that completes your sequences. All right, so that's how you guys get cinematic footage out of your Fujifilm X-S20. Even something as simple as that sequence is telling you a story. We talk about camera settings, we talk about lenses, we talk about filters, compositional technique near the end. And then I tell you how to think in sequences, not just random shots. So you don't need a full frame setup or a bunch of expensive gears. You just need to understand how to work with what you got. And that's how you shoot with purpose. And that's how you get cinematic looking shots for your Fujifilm X-S20. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video, do me a favor and subscribe to my channel. I greatly appreciate your support. Let me know what you guys think of this video. Leave your comments in the comment section. Thanks so much.